Hey now. Did I sing Hey Now? Did I sing All Star in another video? I don't know, just Hey Now is my first instinct is to say Hey Now. And then after that it's to say you're an all star and then I'm halfway through the song basically. Um okay, we talk about gender for a little bit here. You guys, it's so funny to me that just how content changes. It's part of the beauty of, I think, comedy primarily, but um, television or film or whatever. Um, the way perception changes over time, because in no way was this an episode about mental health. In no way. This was 1991. I'm talking about The Simpsons now. This was 1991. Like, mental health as a public health issue wasn't even a blip on the screen. Now, I mean, you know, it's at the top of the list, right? Going through, leading up to, and then going through COVID and post COVID, it's arguably one of the, it's an epidemic almost. Um, and it's at the forefront of uh, everybody's thoughts. Is we're looking for it. We're so attuned to it, mostly because we ignored it for so long in the '90s and prior, that now everything is viewed through this lens of mental health. So, you know, I'm going through I'm going through your comments, and it's like everybody brought it up, right? Um, and you're not wrong. Um, you're definitely not wrong. It's just interesting that that's that 2024 lens, um, through which you guys view everything. Get it's hard to get past that. Um, but I liked what Charlie had to say about that. Like, this probably wasn't made. It definitely wasn't made to be a comment on mental health, but it does show how far we've come, and that now we are recognizing it, and it is totally relevant on a different plane than it was when it came out. It's it's another it's more of a it's a more subtle prophecy, right? I'm sure you've seen all the memes about all the things that the Simpsons basically like predicted. Um, this is another one. Like, mental health is going to be a thing, like a big deal. Um, and how they have some interesting ways that they deal with it too. I think Tiffany mentioned this. Jeff mentioned this. The way Homer and Leon interact is pretty healthy, considering the time, right? Like, Homer's like, I don't get your thing with the voice and the one glove and the taking a chimpanzee to the Grammy. Like, I don't get it, but I don't hate you for it. I don't discriminate against you for it. Yeah, you're different. Like, difference, who cares? And same with Homer, right? So their treatment of each other, their understanding between them, is something that I hadn't really thought about it, because I hadn't thought about this episode through this lens of mental health. What I, as you know now, to me, this episode is about gender. Um, Hence, it leads off the week with Scrubs and Who's the Boss. Um, so I'm gonna go into that for a little bit, just explain it, uh, like my little theories on it. Um, but in no way does it detract from your insights about the mental health aspects of the episode. Like that's the beauty of stuff like this, content like this. Um, so yeah, I thought everyone's like, oh, this is about mental health. It's about mental health. I'm like, you've almost been not programmed, but sort of like, but in a good way, like to sort of read the signs and um, interpret things and sort of be compassionate about it. So that's um, who was saying that? Charlie. That's progress, I guess. Um, so Simpsons, just in general, it's obviously it started in 1989, 80s. It's been on since the 80s. So it's 35 seasons now. I keep having to change the number because it's still on TV. But for me, it's proof that funny and meaningful aren't mutually exclusive, right? A lot of people think that um, because, as I mentioned early in the semester session, whatever the fuck it's called, um, that's something we're conditioned to believe, that funny things aren't also serious things. They're not opposites, right? The opposite of funny is not funny. So, uh, there. Um, so how is this episode about gender? Um, I think this is always a game that we play when I'm teaching it in person, trying to drag it out of them and students and have them connect, like really connect to what happens in the episode, because it's not slap you in the face explicitly about gender. You have to read the cues and it's coded in a very specific way. And again, it's 1991. So you basically have this idea, gender is performative, right? People love to conflate and sex, gender and sexuality, which aren't, they do align sometimes, like anything. You can stereotype people based on either, but one doesn't necessarily equal the other. It's a big problem that we have with understanding uh, the world, is that most people conflate those two things, gender and sexuality. Gender is a choice. Sexuality is not a choice. I don't think. That's just my take. You can choose, because gender is all how you basically show yourself to the world, like how you look, how you dress, how you talk, like Leon, right? How you talk, your voice high, low, whatever choices you make. It's the 100 choices a day that you make that sort of tell the world who you are, that kind of thing. Um, it's also arbitrary. Like if it's something you can choose and develop like that, then why do we put so much stock into it, so much weight on it? It's performative. So it's the multitude of decisions you make every day, right, about how you want to present yourself to the world. That, to me, that's my very loose definition of gender. So in this episode, right? I mean, the pink shirt is, I mean, that's the dead giveaway that this is about gender, right? It immediately goes to this whole idea that pink is a feminine color, like it's just for women, um, which is, again, just a stupid, arbitrary gender stereotype. And I got some beef with Jeff and Jaden. Both of you talked about Homer wearing the pink shirt, but you used the wrong word. You both used the word decides. When Homer decides to wear the pink shirt, he didn't have a choice. He didn't have a choice between a pink one and a white one, and he chose the pink one. That would be um, kind of the sign of a, a more progressive, right? And Homer's just not that person. We see that throughout the episode. He's forced to, and just by being forced to against his will because he had no other shirt. I mean, literally, what does he say when he realizes he has to wear a pink shirt? It's all over, right? I'm not. What does he say? I'm not popular enough to be different, right? And his reaction, he strangles Bart because he put his red hat, made the shirt pink, sort of forced him into this situation. So he's basically, he knows the repercussions of wearing this pink shirt because he's usually the one reinforcing them, right? He's every man. Homer, throughout the entire course of the series, is every man. He's supposed to represent just like down the middle, you know, just American schmuck, basically. And that he knows when he's like, I have to wear this shirt, I'm fucked. Everyone's gonna make fun of me. I'm gonna stand out. I'm not popular enough to be different. It's all over, right? This is based on one decision that he didn't even get to make, right? One choice that he didn't even get to make. And everything sort of spirals out of control from there. Now, here's where you could bring the mental health aspect in, is that just being different in our society gets you the stamp on your hand that says you're insane, right? Like going against anything, the status quo, whatever it is a one-way ticket to ostracization, if that's a word. I don't know if it is. So once he does that, you start to see this commentary about how we react to difference. In this case, a gender difference, right? They make fun. He takes the pink donut at work. They call him a pink donut eater. Like there's 100% a gender sexuality joke in there, right? That now, yeah, with, I don't know, there's something there. I don't want to get too graphic with you guys. So once that all happens with the shirt, he literally is labeled insane, right? And again, here's Homer again, sort of, he's the foundation on which many of these stereotypes and judgments and prejudices are built. So when he puts the pink shirt on, he knows he's in for it. Because if the shoe were on the other foot and someone else had a pink shirt on, he knows what he would be saying and how he would be acting, right? So he's literally labeled insane. So like, he knows he's not, but he can't get past the label, right? So once you're labeled as something, he knows that means more than, clearing your name, like whatever, like than what people know to be true, which he's not insane. Um, so he completely buys into the label. Now, the actual label is, a metaphor for um, other labels, other sort of discriminatory or restrictive labels that we like to put on to different races, genders, sexualities, all that kind of stuff. Um, so they use Leon slash Michael Jackson, that character, um, to sort of, I think, bring Homer to a better understanding of, and us to a better understanding of how gender actually works. Um, they're paired up, and they don't, they're um, completely different, right? Um, and who, other than like Prince, maybe in the late 80s, early 90s, who was a more gender confused character in pop culture than Michael Jackson? Um, I don't, I don't know. I think it was strategic that they used Michael Jackson as well. And you may have found this. This episode's been wiped from. I don't even know. You guys must have watched it though. It got wiped from Amazon or something in all the Michael Jackson stuff. Because it was Michael Jackson. He asked not to be credited at the end. So that was his voice. He did all the voice acting for it. Um, so they're at the asylum or whatever, which is an awesome One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest parody. Um, I don't know, assuming some of you got that, although you didn't mention it. Um, we get a sort of glimpse into who these people really are, right? They put him in this room with this huge guy who thinks he's Michael Jackson, and you know Homer, who's been labeled insane and made all these assumptions about because he has this pink shirt, is explain he's falling asleep, right? He's falling asleep, and Michael Jackson's singing him this lullaby or whatever. As he's falling asleep, he's muttering words in his, as he's falling asleep. And what are those words? Those words, that's who he really is, right? That's who we know Homer is, regardless of what color shirt he wears or how he, you know, wears his hair or, whatever, how he talks, whatever it is. We know that he likes football, pancakes, boobies, and waffles. Like those are the four things. He's like pancakes, boobies, right? It's like that's Homer. And we know that. Like nothing has changed. And he just wore this shirt. He didn't make a gender choice, but yeah, that's kind of what's going on. And so we can see that, right? And then the next day when they're getting out and they're going to have this big party, he assumes all these things about Leon, right? Stock the fridge with beer, get a bunch of cold cuts, and he's like, "No, I'm sober. I'm a vegetarian." And he's like, "You sure you're not crazy?" Like we know who Homer is. This shirt changed nothing, but to the world, it changed everything, and that's how I think they're trying to expose how silly that is, right? That wearing a specific colored shirt can change people's perceptions of who you are. Homer doesn't change at all. If anything, he grows. He gets better because he sees Leon as this, yeah, like he doesn't judge him the way he might have had he not been put in that situation. Um, so then Leon helps Bart, right, helps Bart get in touch with his feelings, right, and makes a song for Lisa, and Leon's like, comes out as, this bricklayer from Paterson, New Jersey with this, he's just this big sort of goof, this big oaf. And he's like, people treated me a certain way. I didn't like it, so I changed my gender. I mean, I know he didn't technically, but he changed the way he talked and started doing nice things. That's kind of a gender change from like a typical alpha toxic masculinity, da 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 da. Right? The voice thing was the big change that he made. People started to think he was more sensitive, more intuitive, intelligent, whatever it was, and they started to treat him different. And he started to help people. And like, it was who he really was, right? Like, that's a bunch of you guys kind of got to that point. Where it's like, you gotta let people be who they want to be. I think Jaden said it, like, well, who cares who people are if it's not impacting your life in a negative way? Like, why all the sort of hand wringing and pearl clutching? I don't know. It's also, there's this generational thing too. Like when I was saying, like, you guys see this as a mental health thing, and it is. In the episode, like, Burns, who's like 100 years old, his first reaction to Homer in the pink shirt is that he's a communist, right? A pinko. That he's a gay communist, basically, which is like, that's, for 1991, that's outdated. So like, we can see how they're sort of incorporating that into it as well. A lot of this is about embracing your identity. Like, a bunch of you guys tapped into that too, which I think was great. Even Bart. Like, you can't just always be this punk kid, right? Everybody should be somewhere in the middle of their masculine and feminine, because there are great things about each of those sort of ethos. So Bart, has to let go of his macho self and to come up with this song, and that's what Leon does. Leon sort of brings Homer back towards the middle, and Bart. So it's like, it's not as blatantly about gender as Who's the Boss is, by any means, but I always think it's a good place. It's a good place to start this discussion. So, good comments. Again, really focusing on the mental health, which is, I appreciate it, because I should probably look into it more. I've always read it as this gender episode, so a lot of your comments are kind of opening me up to those interpretations as well. Right, Tiffany brought it up right off the bat, and a lot of you talked about identity. I'd go the step further and say it's about gender identity, right? The pink shirt is just, that's just the biggest clue that you have, and then self-acceptance is kind of what a bunch of you tapped into. Chloe, and again, it doesn't do it as blatantly as Scrubs and Who's the Boss, but it's sort of, I almost like it that way. Chloe was talking about how it challenges the stigmas and misconceptions of mental health. So I think it's good that it has that prophetic nature, because a lot of times you can look back, whatever it is, 30 plus years, and be like, ooh, they didn't get that right, a little tone deaf on that one. As 30 years, a lot happens, but it seems like this is one where they're like, shit, we should be taking our mental health cues from this episode of The Simpsons. Um, that was Charlie was talking about how far we've come, how relevant the episode is, um, and the sort of the prophetic nature of the show. And I think that's inherent to comedy in general. If you're constantly looking at things that are fucked up and looking for answers and solutions and perspectives, you're gonna stumble onto some things. You're gonna figure some things out. And I like Bella's comment about the longevity of the show, allowing it the space for viewers to relate to it. Like there's so much Simpsons. Like there's aren't many ideas or topics or concepts or whatever's issues that they haven't covered, right? And back to my point I made a second ago, like they're gonna hit yours right at some point. I thought that was good, and then there is the thread of how conformity connects to gender decisions, gender choices. Jeff talked about that, and I brought up Jaden's. If it doesn't impact you, why do you care? I'm a big proponent of that. So then we move to Who's the Boss, and again, it's the '80s gender boom. I talked about it a couple times. Charles in Charge, Mr. Belvedere, Benson, even like Golden Girls, like Mona, who plays Angela's mom, the redhead. Like there was that too. There was her and the Golden Girls are basically like, hey, we're in our 60s, but we still like to fuck. So like, don't write us off. There was that part of the gender boom, which I don't know who was asking for that, but Mona's this like sex starved octogenarian, basically. A little weird. Um, but as women were moving into more masculine spaces, men were accepting more feminine roles. Like that was the theme of those shows that I just mentioned, all about like butlers or live-in housekeepers or whatever it is. And Who's the Boss is far and away the best of all of them. And who's saying that? Chloe. Tony and Angela are not married. In fact, it's one thing that kept the show going for so long was the will they, won't they storyline, which really people started to lean into. It is a sitcom after all. People really started to lean into it after like season 3. Like, oh, are they gonna hook up? Are they gonna get married? Like, because there was always that chemistry, I guess. But they're not married. Angela's divorced, and I want to say Tony's wife died. It's been a while since I watched the whole thing. So the first thing they do with the show is it's called Who's the Boss. So like clearly it's putting out there right off the bat this idea of literally who's the boss, right? I It's a great question. Is Angela the boss? Is Tony the boss? Because typically the man is the boss. So that's your initial, especially in '84, whenever this started. Your first was like, oh, Tony's the boss because he's the guy. But then you're like, Angela literally pays him. He works for her, so she's the actual boss, and she owns this ad agency, so she's the boss outside the home as well. But it starts to bring in those questions. And this episode really deals with that idea of who's the boss. Who's the boss? Yeah, I'm always like, for some reason, people were like, wait, there's another boss, right? Like, that's the initial reaction is like, what do you mean, who's the boss? It's the guy, of course. The show could have been, in my opinion, they could have called it, Why Does There Necessarily Have to Be a Boss? right, in all of this. Um, but every aspect of Who's the Boss sort of seeks to dismantle our preconceived notions of gender. Every aspect of it, right down to Mona, as I mentioned before, being this like hypersexualized, like older woman, like postmenopausal woman. Like that's weird. Um, but you look at Angela and Tony, like that's what this episode is about. But if you take it a step further, and you guys don't know this, you guys don't know this except for, wait, where am I going with this? I think Shay. I think it was Shay who said she's going to start binging it. Unless Shay binged it long enough. The kids represent very similar gender dynamics. So it's like everything that Tony and Angela are going through, Jonathan and Samantha are going through it. So Samantha, played by Alyssa Milano, is a tomboy. Like that's her whole thing. They're from the Bronx, moving to Connecticut. You know, she's got this Bronx accent. Well, they're from Brooklyn. She's got this accent. She loves sports, right? She wears like flannels and jeans, and she's just sort of this rough and tumble, tough girl, tomboy. So there, right away, you're like, oh, that's kind of weird. And then Jonathan is sort of nerdy, smart, very feminized. Just put it that way. So those two are sort of calling all these gender sort of things into question. And in real life, the irony is Alyssa Milano became maybe like a top 3 sex symbol in the world, or in the United States in the 90s. Yes, watched her grow up on Who's the Boss. And Danny Pintaro, who plays Jonathan, came out as gay. So it's like that, even sort of this other layer of interest to it. So it's hard to say that this isn't about gender. It's like it's literally impossible to say it, because every relationship has these calls into question a lot of what we sort of assume about gender. So getting into the core of the episode, a lot of you guys came up with this kind of, but this episode is interesting because Tony and Angela are fine with their relationship. This arrangement that they have is perfect, right? They're both sort of leaning into their opposites, right? Tony's secure enough with himself to know that he's the housekeeper. It doesn't affect him at all. Like, he likes the work. It's a good job. He has a good relationship. He doesn't feel emasculated at all. He's very, who someone brought up toxic masculinity. Najima talked about toxic masculinity. Like it's kind of diffused here, right? You see it. The only time you see it, I'm gonna get to that. The only time you see it is when he decides what color to paint the car, right? So there's that, and they're happy with their relationship basically, and the trade-offs or the compromises that they've made, and they're very happy. And it's not until the other housekeepers come over and hang out with Tony that Tony realizes something's wrong here, because they all are like, wait, something's wrong here. Like, you'll see, you're just the help, and she thinks of you as this. You're not friends, but they are. We can see it. Um, and she'll put you in your place, like all this stuff. You have to know your place and all that. And that kind of gets him thinking. Like that to me is this, like, it's kind of connected to the Simpsons episode in that way. Like, we're going along just fine. Like, we're happy. We got this little, like, weird kind of family thing going. Um, we're both happy. We're doing our jobs well. Like, whatever. Like, literally never thought about it until the outside world pointed at it and said, this is wrong. This is fucked up. This isn't how it's supposed to go. And only then, only when Tony takes into account the way society sees him, does he get kind of toxically masculine. And be like, I can decide. I'll pick the car color. It's not my car, but I'll do it anyway. And then even Angela, right? There's a fine line between employer and employee, right? And the rich, sort of slutty neighbor comes over and gets in her ear. So it's not until the outside world or the culture around them sees what's happening and doesn't like it and thinks it's weird that they start to question what they have. And instead of saying, like, no, you're stupid, you're wrong, and just going about their business, they buy into it. It's like that's the power of that sort of like conformity or whatever. And judgment and just like, what will people think? So that's a huge part of this, a huge metaphor here. They're fine with their choices and their situation till the culture points at them and tells them that it's wrong. So that's the whole episode pivots on that, because then it changes. Tony turns into like a real butler, right? Basically saying to Angela, like, do you really want me to just do my job and, like, you know, put me in my place, you know, and play my role, as it were? No. And that's another thing about this show. It's important that they don't feminize Tony at all. Right? If they had done that, you could easily be like, oh, well, yeah, he's this sort of foppish guy. Of course he's a housekeeper. So, like, they have him, right, he's an ex-baseball player. And, you know, he's got tattoos and he's all muscled up and he's teaching the workout class and he's all, you know, he's all hard for the one housekeeper, and then he's we can see that he's still traditionally masculine, but he has sort of again accepted his role in this kind of weird scenario. That's another sort of little play on that kind of stuff. So then when they go to the traditional roles, that's when it shits, right? It highlights the stupidity of the traditional roles. When Tony goes full butler and Angela's got the bell and she's like, oh, just being all, you know, employee with it. So it's like Delta Burke, who plays the neighbor who wants to steal Tony, basically, she represents like traditional femininity. So they have that little conversation in the garage, Angela and Tony, and it's sort of like, let's get back to what we had, which was this sort of mutual understanding that, you know, being a woman isn't one thing, and being a man isn't the other thing. There's a happy, we figured it out, basically. So you guys touched on some of those things, right? Um, Angela is playing masculinity basically, being the owning the business, employing Tony. She's a little. She has more power. She's more cold, less emotional. Tony is super sensitive. Um, so they're sort of playing that off of each other. Um, I brought up Najima talking about the toxic masculinity thing. I thought that was a nice contemporary take on this episode, right? Um, Tony's secure enough in his masculinity to not feel threatened by any of it. And Tony versus Homer, they're sort of, I think, like accepting um, more accepting of it, I guess. Um, okay, then you move to Scrubs. You fast forward. This is '01, so you're fast forwarding, you know, 10 years from that Simpsons episode. And it's kind of like Who's the Boss in that uh, Scrubs like challenges preconceived notions of gender throughout virtually every character, right? A bunch of you brought up Turk and JD, their relationship, their bromance. It's 100% about gender, right? And it's a play on what I was talking about at the beginning, how we conflate gender and sexuality, because there's the oh, JD and Turk are gay, which is, no, they're not. They're just different. They're not your typical like alpha bro out relationship. They're it's a nuanced bromance, as it were. I think this was around the time the term bromance was invented. Um, there's that relationship. There's Turk and Carla, right? Carla 100% wears the pants in their relationship. They end up getting married, obviously, and dating. He's terrified of her, right? She has virtually all the power, and is constantly emasculating Turk, who is pretty masculine, as he is a scalpel jockey, as it were, right? In the as being a surgeon. So you have Dr. Reed. She plays this, like, yes, female doctor, but consumed with all of the insecurities and low self-worth and self-doubt, all those kinds of things that are traditionally attached to women. And if you look at Kelso, who's like the chief of medicine at the hospital, he's from this older generation who doesn't understand gender at all. He 100% conflates it with he's stubborn, he's not going to change at all. Cox, Dr. Cox, his relationship with JD is like a man and a woman, right? Cox is alpha male, right? Toxic masculinity, calling him girls' names, constantly questioning his masculinity and all those kinds of things. So there's Turk, and then the Todd, right? Todd is this, he's the most macho, the most masculine, right? He's consumed with sex, and I think he ends up coming out of the closet. Like, he's he ends up being gay. I'm sure I'm missing characters in it. Oh, Jordan, Cox's wife, or ex-wife, whatever it is, baby mama, whatever it is. Like, she, in this episode especially, but she's very masculine. She almost out-masculines Dr. Cox and makes him feel like shit, which is another interesting relationship. So there's all these, every episode puts these things into a blender, these conceptions of what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman, and all the gray area in between, right? With the backdrop of the medical field, which is, I think, typically considered a masculine field, right? And it just sort of heightens all that stuff. So Cox, in this episode, Dr. Cox and Jordan's reactions to the death of her brother cross gender representations, right? She's cold about it. She's like, move on. I just want to party, keep going. Like, basically pushing it down, burying it. And Cox can't. He's a blubbering idiot, right? He's super emotional about it. So that even in your sort of pure representations of masculinity, you see these cracks, right? That's what cracks, as it were. When we know they're not weaknesses, like being emotional is not a weakness, but typically we prescribe it to women, and it is seen as a weakness in that case. So there's all these different, and then in this episode, they add Dr. Miller, right? Who's this super badass female surgeon, and she's calling out all the toxic masculinity, right? The Todds, the Turks, those kinds of things, and she's calling out this, Dr. Reed's pseudo-feminist bullshit, right? About how, yeah, you're the worst kind of woman doctor, basically. You're killing us, right? And brings up this gender issue of the saviors versus the idiots, right? Like, she pegs Turk as this guy who's like, oh, I can save you, right? When he's just trying to be nice. They have that whole back and forth about it. And then there's Todd, who's just a fucking moron. Like, which is worse to the cause of women moving forward and gaining equality and being respected and seen as equals? Is it the Todds or is it the Turks? It's probably the Turks, right? Because Todd is just a fucking idiot. Like, you can sort of almost dismiss him. Like, he's not impeding you necessarily in any way. But the saviors are sort of can be setbacks. And she shut that down immediately. There's all the, I don't know what this means, objectification of women versus institutionalization versus infantilization. So Todd is just blatant objectification. All he sees when he sees a woman is her parts, right? Sex. Kelso is like institutionalized sexism, basically, right? He thinks the same way that Todd does, but it's more sort of ingrained or devious, or systemic, I guess. And then infantilization. Oh, right. Turk infantilizes Dr. Miller, basically. Like, oh, right, you're just the woman doctor. I'll take care of you. Like that kind of thing. Um, and all she wants is respect, right? Um, so you look at it and you're like, the Dr. Miller, Dr. Reed thing, who's holding who back? Miller says that Dr. Reed is the kind of doctor that she is, who still needs all this approval, who still is just hoping the guy's looking at her like all that kind of stuff? Or is the one who is like Dr. Miller just sort of like being an asshole, seemingly, to everyone in her path, just sort of because she can? Like, that doesn't seem helpful either. Um, so this show, I think, does as good a job as Who's the Boss does, and brings up a lot of these. This episode, obviously, I picked it on purpose because it, with the Dr. Miller thing, I think it gave it a wrinkle to the whole episode that isn't in a normal episode, right? Bringing in this really strong female character to sort of play off of Dr. Cox, this really strong masculine character, to see how all of these characters kind of interact with this new influence is pretty interesting. And you have, through Carla's whole sensitivity training or whatever it was, right? You kind of see these generational, kind of like Burns in that Simpsons episode. Kelso's like Burns, right? He's like talking about things that are so far gone. You're not going to change that guy, and you're not going to change Todd, right? Because he's just a fucking idiot. So it's like, where can we make the progress? And it's probably with, well, she makes the progress with Dr. Cox. He realizes what's going on with Jordan and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, this video is long. Anyway, I hope you got something out of this. Only got a week left. Papers are due Sunday. And, you can, if you have it done before that, you can certainly email it to me whenever you have it done. So, yeah, I'll be around. There'll be more of these.